Welcome back. Queen Elizabeth II just died, and there's a lot going on because of that. And so I'm going to be joined here by my good friend Cameron Abaroa. He is a very well-informed Anglophile, knows tons of stuff about not just Queen Elizabeth, but also the history of the monarchy, what this means, and what we can expect moving forward. I'm going to warn you now, we just did this a few minutes ago, and I don't really feel like there's much I could cut out and make it still be a good video, so this might be one that you just kind of put on in the background. It's going to be a long one, but it's got a lot of really cool information in it. So before we talk to him, though, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the interview. Welcome, Cameron, and thank you for meeting with me.
Hello.
This is it's always confusing because we went to not high school. We went to college together, and we had the same friends group, and I remember everyone would be like, Cameron, and we'd both be like, what?
Turn our heads.
Exactly.
Yep.
But you are much more of an Anglophile than I am.
I am.
You are significantly more. I may have the degrees in history, but when it comes to English history, you are the man. Seriously.
I am an enthusiast. I have hyperfixations, and British history became one of them.
Hey, and if that works, it works.
We all need something to pass the time.
We do. So, first of all, obviously the reason we're here is because Queen Elizabeth II just died.
Yes.
And I've been getting a lot of hate on my YouTube comments on some shorts, or just the like-dislike ratio, because I've made some pro-American memes about her death, which I get are insensitive, but I don't care.
Yeah. There's a lot. It's fraught, because at the same time that we're making all these jokes, how hey, we broke away from the monarchy in 1776, it's still kind of a thing that the British Empire still technically exists. It's obviously the Commonwealth of Nations. It's this whole other thing. So there's a lot of emotions tied to this one person's death.
Right. For
Irish Twitter.
Oh my gosh.
It's hilarious
Irish
right now.
TikTok is hilarious now.
Irish TikTok, Irish Twitter, Indian Twitter is doing some very interesting things.
Man, I wouldn't even have thought to check there, but that makes a lot of sense.
Kind of everywhere.
Yeah.
It's all of these formerly colonized areas of the British Empire that are we get it, but also colonization.
Right. And so my thing is, I'm interested in it historically. I'm very interested in it from the perspective of she had a long life. And I saw a John Green video where he was talking about how she was 15 when Pearl Harbor was attacked. And she was in her 70s or 80s already, or something like that. Maybe it was 60s when Nelson Mandela was released. And how she's covered all this amount of history. And I know that her own life and views aren't without controversy either. We've had this whole Meghan Markle, Princess Diana kind of stuff going on in the past. But at the same time, people love her to death regardless of that. And I can respect that. And so from my perspective, I'm interested in seeing how people are responding. I'm interested to see what Charles is going to do. Just because I love the idea that we are currently living in a historically significant moment.
It very much is.
But at the same time, I'm very much America. But then I've got Bilbo Baggins here. I'm wearing a Beatles shirt, so it's not like I hate England.
I know. It's fraught being an American who is hey, I really think the Queen's cool. I also don't like the idea of monarchy, but I think the Queen's great. Kind of this weird dichotomy, but it is fascinating, mostly because I think you're going to see that the majority of the outside of Great Britain grief is actually going to probably be the United States. If there's anyone who's a bigger fan of the British monarchy than the British, it's the Americans, which is a whole other thing.
Right. So maybe can you just sum up in one couple of sentences for me? Because I'm thinking, is it just because there's more of us here to be interested in it? Or
it's possible. I think it's also this idea of we broke away from the monarchy, from this idea of being part of this great imperial family. Actually, on Queen Elizabeth's 21st birthday, she calls the Commonwealth at the time. We're not a part of that. So it's this, I think my personal opinion, there's studies that have been done. It's a whole thing. No one can really pinpoint why the Americans are so obsessed with the monarchy. But I think it's because we don't have one, but we might have had one.
Okay. So it's kind of like a little bit of FOMO.
Kind of, maybe. That one's also a little fraught to try and judge why every single Anglophile in the United States is an Anglophile.
Right. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So
Hmm.
then just tell me your thoughts. Queen Elizabeth II, moving forward, anything. What your reaction, your thoughts? What do you got?
So I actually, and this shows how much of an Anglophile I am, I got the notification that the doctors had confined
Oh my
her
gosh. I didn't even get
before
that.
anything else. And I got it, and slowly started getting the notifications that the Prince of Wales was on his way. Prince William was on his way. Oh no, Prince William is with every single one of the children. They're on their way. Harry's on his way. The moment they announced Harry was on his way, that is when I totally knew, oh yeah, no, this is it. Okay.
Wow. See, I think what happened for me was I got a Facebook, like scrolling through my feed, like on my prep period. I got a meme. Someone mentioned like the queen was dead, and then I was like, what? I don't know. Is that real? And then as I was thinking, is that real? I got just a news story notification that I
Hmm.
get, and it said Queen
Yeah.
of England announced by Buckingham Palace to have passed away, and I was like, oh,
Yep. I had specifically turned my desk so my students couldn't see my screen so I could keep teaching while I had CNN going in silence. So I was
that's
just consistently
amazing.
checking. And they were showing the images of the royal family arriving. And then I got it, and I took just a little bit of a moment. My students were working on another project. So I took a little bit of a moment to go, oh, this is very big. This
Wow.
is very big.
That's how I am with like the World Cup or the Olympics.
I mean, who isn't that way about the World Cup?
We're in America. A lot of people
I
aren't that way.
know. Oh, but
Okay.
that's okay.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, what else you got? Your thoughts, your reaction? Like, what do
So
you think is going to happen?
immediately, well, what's interesting is with British succession, immediately upon the death of Queen Elizabeth II, Charles became king. So for me, the most interesting thing was what is going to happen immediately to secure that transition of authority without too much fuss, to kind of address the elephant in the room.
Okay. You're getting,
And that
you're a little fuzzy
I'm a little
again.
blurry. I'm a little blurry. Let's
There
see.
we go.
There we go. To address kind of the elephant in the room, which is Charles may not have been the most liked person on earth due to Diana. So how were they going to try and deal with that? And so I found it very fascinating getting these notifications that Charles is taking the name Charles III, which is a whole other thing with British history that is
Really?
fascinating to me. We'll probably want to get into that, what happened to
Yeah.
the first two Charleses, because it wasn't good. And then moving on, these proclamations that they were making, everything that's happening on the day we're filming this, of course, the accession council and the official proclamation ceremony occurred. And we're going to get more information about when the coronation's going to be. We know now when the funeral's going to be on Monday, September 19th. I'm going to have to be waking up in the middle of the night to see it. And I will be doing that because it'll be fascinating.
I'll probably just get the highlights reel. So, what's interesting to me, though, out of everything you just said, what stuck out to me the most that I wanted to cover first is in English succession, the second she dies, he's already the king. So, we don't
Yes.
have to wait for an official coronation. He can officially start making, in theory, I know they don't have any power, but he could be immediately start advising or decision making.
And he did, yes. And
Okay.
he did, actually. So the first major event that happens with a new monarch's reign, oh, I'm still fuzzy. The first thing that happens with a new monarch's reign is an event known as the Accession Council. It is a meeting of the Privy Council, the most high senior members of the government, basically to confirm, yes, the previous monarch has passed, and the new monarch is the new monarch.
Okay, and the proclamation of that just happened today on the 10th.
Yes.
Saturday the
Yes.
10th, right? Okay.
Yes, when we're filming this. And so that actually happened concurrently. The Accession Council led directly into the proclamation ceremony. The Accession Council actually does had some businesses, mostly of royal authority is held in the seals. We can't change over the seals yet. So they're still going to say Elizabeth, but is that okay? Things of that nature. It is mostly ceremonial. Fuzzy again. To viewers, I will probably be going in and out of fuzziness. I apologize for that. But the Accession Council had its businesses mostly ceremonial at this point, but it sets the precedent that the king will be at these Privy Council meetings in the future. It basically just kicks everything off.
Okay. So he has already then begun his duties. That's really cool.
Yes, his first duty was obviously to release a statement that said, "Thank you for the condolences. Yes, we all miss the Queen." In fact, can pull up the official statement, which was very short and very interesting. And the first words I read were an announcement from His Majesty the King, and I had many emotions that moment. Mostly because then we just partially we're still dealing with he's king now. We're still all remembering Diana, which is a whole fascinating thing. I can guarantee we're going to get into that one in a bit.
You can't talk about Charles and not talk about Diana.
It's so true. But to kind of keep a flow to this, Charles immediately issues a statement. It kind of confirms as his king. He begins his duties, one of which was actually to name his son as the Prince of Wales. That title does not pass automatically. Okay. It is a title that is held in the gift of the monarch.
So then is the Prince of Wales automatically the heir to the throne, or?
Yes. So the naming of the Prince of Wales is an acknowledgement that this is the heir.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it's there's no contest. It's going to be William. So instead of having a big ceremony, which they may still do, he was named Prince of Wales on Friday.
So then, I know William. William has a child or two. Are they? Yes. Do we know? Do you know if it's a boy or a girl?
The firstborn son of William is George.
So then,
so he is now second in line to the throne. Everyone moved up a spot.
So the reason I ask is that means that we could potentially not have a queen in our lifetime anymore.
In fact, it is almost a guarantee. Unless something very tragic happens, we will never see a reigning queen in our lifetime, which is interesting.
Yeah, because I mean, it's been since 1952. Everyone who's been born from 1952 on has said Elizabeth II, Queen of England, and now it's going to be the opposite. That's very interesting.
Yeah, it will be the King of England, which is very. I personally don't know how I feel about that, just because it's been such a staple in our lives that England always has a queen.
Yeah,
because she reigned for so long.
So then
70 years. So then she passes away and we're switching everything.
So then your mixed feelings are less about the actual position of king and more so much just the vocabulary. I'm so used to it being the Queen of England that now we have to make that mental shift.
And then the first time people sang God Save the King, it was kind of the same thing. It was like, this doesn't feel right because 30 years of listening to God Save the Queen, now we have to switch it to God Save the King.
So it's like that feeling when you move into a new house and you're like, this isn't my house, even though it is. It's like, this isn't my king,
it's not quite there
but it is.
Yet.
Yeah, okay.
Mine. I'm an American citizen. He's not mine.
Right. Not my king.
Yeah. So some very interesting things. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, how does Parliament come into this then?
Parliament, the relationship of Parliament with the monarch is actually very fascinating because it brings us to the idea of Charles I. So I'll talk about the relationship and then I'll actually talk about the first Charles and how that relationship gets formed. Parliament is the legislative body of the government. Obviously, the head of Parliament is the Prime Minister. He's the chief. She now, excuse me, as of 3 days ago.
Yeah, that was like one of her last things that she did.
It was the last duty that the Queen performed.
Wow.
And she did it only days before she passed on,
Right.
which shows you how much she was working before she died.
Wow. Way to
But
go.
Parliament is I know, right? She never could retire, which is actually kind of sad when you think about it. A whole other thing.
Yeah.
Parliament has this relationship with the crown as they are the elected body, they are the government, and then there is the monarchy, which is the source of authority for Parliament. However, it's fraught, but it's also this very interesting marriage. There's this idea of, I'm gonna mispronounce his name, Walter Bagehot, was one of the foremost philosophers on how monarchy and the parliament work together, and he said that in the government there's two types of government. There's the ceremonial or the dignified, that he calls it, and then the kind of mundane, the everyday workings of government. And the parliament is supposed to be in charge of the everyday governance of the nation, and the monarch is supposed to be in charge of the dignified.
Okay. So then my understanding is, with that in mind, my my thought was that the parliament made basically every decision. And they could advise the king or queen. They could advise the monarch, or they could inform the monarch, or they could seek their opinion on things, but didn't actually have to. And there were periods where Queen Elizabeth was very well informed and times where she wasn't informed. It's more like a courtesy. Is that true?
Yes and no,
Okay.
in the sense that the queen has to be the king, the monarch has to be aware of what is happening in parliament. They are not necessarily allowed to make comment on it. They are not a part of that process. But at the end of the day, a bill in parliament doesn't become a law until it is signed by the monarch. Very
Oh,
similar to how a
interesting.
bill in the United States Congress is not law until the president signs it.
Interesting. I thought that was the prime minister's job.
The prime minister is the chief minister of the queen. So she is in charge. Liz Truss, the new prime minister, is in charge of the running of government.
Okay.
But actual laws, becoming laws, is in the gift of the queen. So
Interesting.
the monarch, it is given royal assent.
Now, I know there's also something like the monarch's scepter or staff is in parliament, and that's the symbol of power. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And so, in theory, and this could get back to, I think it's King Charles who gave them the scepter. Is that correct?
Kind of. And then this is a part of British history that I'm less familiar with.
Okay.
However, Charles the First openly tries to work around Parliament and
That I do remember.
an
Yeah.
absolute monarch.
Yeah.
So Parliament is actually this very fascinating thing. The United Kingdom is one of the world's earliest constitutional monarchs, and it did not get there without a lot of bloodshed.
Oh, yeah. King John.
Charles,
Ugh.
well, King John, Magna Carta, all that, but Charles the First is the king that essentially begins the English Civil War, leading to the interregnum with Oliver Cromwell in charge.
That's right.
Once again, to me, it is fascinating that Charles III chose that name, because Charles I eventually gets executed by Parliament.
Oh boy, way to set yourself up. You know, that's not an omen for yourself or anything at all.
It's strange, but then his son Charles II gets, after brief primer on British history, King Charles I tries to openly flout Congress. There becomes a lot of disagreements. He walks into the House of Commons, which is the somewhat 1-to-1 ratio of the House of Representatives. However,
Okay.
the House of Commons holds slightly, for American audiences, that's kind of where we're thinking is House of Representatives. The King Charles I walks into the House of Commons, demands the arrest of members of Parliament, and it begins this whole upheaval that eventually erupts into the English Civil War, where
Right.
you have the parliamentarians and the royalists
I
battling
remember
each
this.
other out.
Yeah. Okay. You're reminding me.
Eventually, yes. Eventually, during this, Charles II, who is Charles I's son, escapes to France, but Charles I gets captured and eventually executed. And then Oliver Cromwell becomes the Lord Protector of
Right.
England. Whether or not that was a good choice is your own
Mm,
guess at
I don't know.
home.
I think you
But
could probably objectively say it was not the best decision.
yeah. Well, for all the actors, it wasn't. He shuts down all the theaters.
Yeah.
Uh, so then Cromwell dies, and his son Charles II comes into play. Charles II restores the monarchy. I actually teach a lot about this in
Hmm.
my English theater classes because that actually he brings back Charles II when he becomes king, brings back theater. He allows women to be actors. It's this whole big, huge theatrical space that happens when he comes back. But one of the things that Charles II is known for is the Great Fire of London.
Oh my gosh. I didn't know that that was the same time as him.
It was about the same time.
Okay.
So once
Wow.
again, Charles III, maybe really the best choice, or is he trying to reinvent it? Maybe he's trying to reinvent it.
Yeah,
Who knows?
I hope he's trying to reinvent it, but I mean, if we're seeing a pattern that each Charles has a major catastrophe, oof, boy.
Well, let's see what happens. Actually, based on his performance at the accession and all of these things, I'm actually slightly intrigued.
Yeah,
I'm like,
because
okay, Charles,
yeah,
interesting.
yeah,
I'm liking you.
which is interesting because I mean, again, my understanding on the British monarchy and how people are perceiving things is very basic, but my thought was that nobody liked Charles, and that part of the reason the Queen never stepped down was like partially an attempt to outlive Charles.
I think that was more of meme fodder than it was anything else.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair.
But it's very fascinating because Charles goes through this very intense period after the divorce with Diana, and especially after Diana's death, where he is not liked. But in the years leading up to his marriage to Camilla Parker Bowles, now the Queen Consort, and then beyond there, it was kind of like a 20-year long, for lack of a better term, rehabilitation of Charles's image,
Okay.
to where I think we're going to see more opposition to him than we did to Elizabeth, but I think less than people expect.
Okay. See, that's kind of comforting in a way because I thought this is going to be no one likes Charles. This is going to be a terrible situation. There's going to be tons of controversy because I mean, even some of the articles I've read, which albeit are very American articles, have been like anyone who meets Charles thinks he's a jerk and no one is like walked away and said that Charles is a nice guy. I'm glad I sat down with him kind of a thing. But at
Hmm.
the same time, like obviously he convinced two women to marry him. So he's got to have some redeeming qualities.
Yes, and obviously we're speaking from America. I've clearly never met any member of the royal family. I
Right.
don't know what their inner thought process is like. So we're only seeing what is the very carefully curated image of the monarchy and specifically of Charles III. But so far, it seems to be business as usual,
Well, that's good.
which in some ways can be very comforting.
Yeah. It makes an easier transition.
Yeah.
So, how do you foresee this going? How do you think it's gonna turn out in these next few months and maybe even long term?
I think it's really hard to say only because right before the Queen's death, there was the whole political shift that led to Liz Truss taking over as prime minister.
Right? Because Boris
Um,
Johnson had a lot of crap happening just within the last 3, 4
yes,
weeks.
yes. And to all of our viewers at home, both of us are school teachers. The school year started. my knowledge of what is happening in the world is basically gone.
Yep.
So I'm picking up all the pieces now. But with that, you have the double whammy of a new prime minister and a new monarch at the same time.
Yeah.
I think if if it had been a sitting prime minister, I think we would have seen more business as usual. I think we're going to see a lot of change. And in fact, we know a little bit of what Charles was planning for his version of monarchy, which was essentially slim it down a little bit more, make it slightly less ostentatious, slightly less performative. But it still remains to be seen, because now that kind of everything's up in the air, we don't know
Yeah.
where the pieces are going to all fall.
So do you think his wanting to slim down the monarchy, is that got political motivations? Is that laziness? Why is he taking that approach?
Every British monarch has a secondary duty besides reigning or running the country, or it's being the head of state of a nation, rather.
Right.
And that is to make sure it keeps going.
Okay.
So, as a personal opinion, it appears that Charles is doing things to make sure that the monarchy remains relevant. And as long as the monarchy remains relevant, it can survive.
Okay. That's not where I thought you were going to go with that when you were talking about second duty. I thought you were going to talk about the Anglican Church.
I mean, that's a whole other thing.
Right. Well, and maybe not to get too much into it, but that I think is where most of the controversy is going to come.
That he is now the head of the Anglican Church and he is a divorced man.
Not just divorced man, because the Anglican Church was kind of like
they were backing off on. They've been backing off for a while.
Well, and even then, the history of the history of Protestantism in England is basically due to Henry VIII wanting a divorce, and so I feel like that's less relevant. I was thinking more about the history of adultery and things like that.
I mean, that's less. Well, pretty much every monarch until Victoria was known for having a lot of adultery.
Even the Virgin Queen Elizabeth I?
I mean, that's a whole other conversation we could have. I'm just going to say Lord Dudley, just saying. But it was always kind of a thing. It was just kind of like a thing that we all knew was going to happen. And that kind of a thing hasn't necessarily been that big of an issue. It'll be interesting, though, to see kind of where he goes with the governance of the church, because he really doesn't govern the church. He has the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Archbishop of York, who are essentially the actual leaders. He is the supreme head of the Church of England.
Okay.
Which meant he had to appoint bishops and things of that nature. But in the same way that there's a prime minister for the government, the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Archbishop of York really kind of take the governance of the church.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
I'm probably missing a few bishops in there as well, but
there's just too many.
I'm an American.
Too many bishops. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So is there anything that you think people need to know about this situation?
I think right now your basic primer for talking to your Anglophile friends is the Queen is dead. The King is here. He's ushering in a whole new change. And we don't know necessarily where it's gonna go. Okay. So there's still a little bit of like mystery, because we know what he's been planning. He's been the longest heir apparent in British history. So we've had a lot of time to learn about what he's going to do. But then again, we don't know what he will end up doing, especially because the world is changing so quickly. And he, as monarch, has to react to it and adapt to it or not adapt to it. That's where it becomes very, very fascinating.
Okay. Do we have a date for the coronation set yet?
Not that has been announced, currently looking at the royal proclamations and royal announcements, and the only date that has been announced currently is the date of the funeral,
All
which
right.
is going to be September 19th.
Yeah.
The last coronation was, of course, Queen Elizabeth's coronation in 1953, which was held the summer after she acceded.
Interesting. Yeah, because I know these coronations just throughout history. There's a lot of times where, and if you can even look at Wikipedia pages, where kings accede the throne, but then their coronation date is even
Mhm.
in some cases like 10 or 15 years later.
Well, and that is pretty common
Right. So is
in
that
the
just a
sense
logistics thing, or is that trying to make it a big celebration and
depends
planning?
on who you talk to, but most of the time it's especially in the modern day, it's all logistics.
Right.
I mean, way back in the day of the medieval era, yeah, you're like, okay, I need to secure my realm before I can actually be crowned. Or you pull a
Right.
Stephen and just get to the church first,
Boy.
which that's a whole other thing. I've said that a lot. I have, if you
There's
are
a
interested in learning more about all these topics, we can sit down and talk
we
again.
could.
Leave comments, like, subscribe, all that.
Thank you for plugging my channel for
Oh,
me.
I
I
got you, man.
appreciate it, man. Okay, those are the most of the questions that I have. Is there anything else of
Yeah.
significance or importance that you had in mind or that you wanted to mention or talk about?
Yeah, for me, I think the most interesting thing is we always think of the monarch as the king of England or the king of the United Kingdom. What's interesting, and the reason we started this conversation, we were joking about colonialism, is that despite us going through this long process of decolonization, the monarch is still monarch of approximately
I think it's 19.
nations.
I, I think
We
it's
can look at the
19. I'll Google it
number.
real quick. You keep
We'll
talking. I'll
Google
Google
it.
it.
We'll put it in there. And is the head of one of the largest international organizations in the world, which is the Commonwealth of Nations. So
Wow, it's
this event,
way more than we thought it was.
how many?
54.
Where were they head of state or members of the
According
Commonwealth?
to the Commonwealth's website at royal.uk, it is 54 independent countries, almost all of which were formerly under British rule.
Yes. She is only actually queen of a few of them, but she is the head of state for she is the head of the Commonwealth. Um, there are 14 Commonwealth realms. So she's the queen of 14, 15 including the United Kingdom. And then the other nations are members of the Commonwealth, which was essentially the kind of compromise to saying, yes, we're going to grant you independence, but we don't want to let go of you just
Right.
yet.
Right. So it looks like there's a significantly higher amount of African countries than I thought there would be. I knew there were a lot of
Yes.
Caribbean and American ones.
Yes.
Cyprus and Malta. Really?
They are members of the Commonwealth. She is not she's not the head of state of their nations, but both of those nations are members of the Commonwealth.
So what's the difference between being a member of the Commonwealth and having the Queen as a head of state? Is it just like an economic trade deal sort of thing, like a NATO almost?
Essentially, the Commonwealth is a mini UN
Okay.
of all the former colonies or associated colonies. For example, the Kingdom of Tonga is
Yeah, it's on there.
a major part of the Commonwealth, but was never fully ruled by England. So there's little bits and pieces there. But
Okay.
it is pretty much the majority of the former imperial colonies, having gained independence, still are keeping ties with the quote unquote mother country, depending on how you feel about that. That's a fraught term.
So I guess then, just to maybe simplify it, is the difference is Commonwealth members continue to just maintain economic and political ties through the Commonwealth. And
Yes.
then those remaining countries that are ruled by her, she still has to sign off on their laws. And I know Canada is part of that.
Which
Is that
is
correct?
done through official, yes, which is done through official representatives called governor generals,
Gotcha. Okay,
which
so
are
she doesn't
appointed
have
by
the
the
bills
monarch.
from Canada sent to her. She appoints
No.
someone to represent her, and that person signs it in her name, or I guess
Mhm.
now his name.
In his name,
Yeah.
yes. Yes.
Again, that
And each
vocabulary
country
change.
has some slight differences. So trying to go through 14 different nations worth of laws, kind of outside the scope of this interview, but it is
Right.
also fascinating.
But that also would make sense why she would or he would have someone representing. That way, the monarch
Yeah.
himself doesn't have to keep track of everything. They have someone that they can trust who will do it for them. That makes a lot
Yep.
of sense.
hmm
Cool.
Is there anything else you want to know?
Man. Yes. Yes. And most of it is future predictions. Like we just
Ooh. Yeah.
don't know, you know?
We just don't know. I mean, we can try and guess.
I mean, I hope it goes well. I hope the transition is easy, and I hope that Charles does a good job. But at the same time, just because I like historical drama, I also kind of hope it doesn't. You know, and I know that's terrible of me to say because it will affect people's legitimate, like real people's lives. But, sorry, as a history teacher, if it's not interesting, it's not gonna be a big part of history. It's not gonna make it into the classes. I want it to be something I can teach about.
I think we can. I think we can firmly say that this new era of the monarchy will be undergoing a lot of changes. What those changes are actually going to be, obviously, we can't predict that. However, Charles will end up being a fundamentally different monarch than his mother.
Right.
Mostly because we're in a completely different world than the one that Elizabeth entered into when she acceded the throne.
So, while you were saying that, I did think of what I think is possibly the most important question, which my wife reminds me every time I start something with that. It means it's definitely not. Are they going to have to reprint all of their money now?
Yep.
So do you think, and I know that they might just start printing his face and just continue to accept the former notes, but do you think they might
They're
try
going to slowly.
Are they going to collect it and reprint or something like that, do you think? Or just
They
slowly
are.
fade it out?
I mean, once again, she is on the currency of 15 nations, so each nation will kind of do its own thing. The plan, as I am aware of it, is to slowly bring out the old bills out of circulation and input the new bills rather than have everyone like turn in their money and then you get
So does this mean that pound notes and coins are now going to be like collector's items?
probably. I don't know. The pounds and banknotes that I have from my travels to England are going to be very different. So
Yeah.
so I'm keeping a hold of them just as a historical memento of like, I remember when the money looked like this.
That is an interesting thing to think about, how they're going to
Mhm.
go about that.
Which is fascinating in terms of logistics. Every mailbox has ER2. Every
What does that mean?
police, Elizabeth Regina II.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Regina is the Latin term for queen.
Right. Regnant.
Yep. So now they have to change them all over to CR3.
Man, can you imagine being like, it's a good time to be a painter, I guess.
I mean, yeah. And I mean, that's also a big thing is how is the international community of tourism going to react to the queen no longer being queen? Because one of the
Yeah.
biggest side effects of having a monarchy is that everyone's fascinated by it, especially Americans.
Right.
So we spend millions upon millions of dollars in England to go see the castles, to go see the
Yeah.
palaces, because guess what? At any chance, the flag could be on the palace and you're in the same building as the monarch.
Right.
Obviously,
I
you're not going
remember.
to see each other, but because they don't do that, but
Right, yeah.
it's still kind of this like chance you could be in the same room as a prince.
I mean, yes, I love that, and I agree with that. And I remember when I was in London, I was there during her birthday, and so I got to go to the parade.
Oh, you went
And
to Dripping the Color?
yeah, and I remember the parade. She went by. She was wearing this like bright lime green outfit, and I was like, "That's a interesting choice." But I guess you're in your 90s, and
Well, and
no
she
one
sticks out.
cares, right? And she'll stick out more. But everyone was, including, I was there with a study group, so a ton of Americans were there, and I remember all of these Americans and everybody around me from tons of different countries just being like, "Oh my gosh, it's the Queen!" Ah, and even me, I got caught up a little bit in the moment. I was
Oh,
like, "Oh my
yeah.
gosh, it's the Queen! That's so cool." Um, I don't know that I would feel the same way about seeing a stinky old man.
Well, I mean, we don't know what he smells like. This is a weird conversation to have now. But I don't know. We'll see what happens. Because I
Yeah,
also know that Diana was beloved worldwide. So who knows kind of a thing. Um, but I can end with this, the time I just fully screamed at the Queen's car as they drove by me. I was also with a study group in London, and we had spent maybe 3 hours outside of Buckingham Palace. We were there, we were just seeing it, and it was great. And then all of a sudden, all these news cameras start showing up, and it turns out we had arrived to Buckingham the day that Prince Philip announced that he was going to step back from public duties
hmm.
because he was getting really old and
Yeah.
unhealthy. And so there was a lot of media attention, and we're standing there and we're standing there, and the gates open and a car pulls out, and all of us are looking, and it zooms past us, and we just see this little tiny streak of white hair. And I was like, that was the Queen. That was her. Oh my goodness. Whoa! And just full on fanboying.
So I got to tell you this one story on a similar note. Yesterday, so I like in my history classes, I like to teach my students, hey, this historically significant thing just happened.
Hmm.
So I remember last year, and I should probably continue to do this, but I haven't. But last year I was talking about like what's going on in Ukraine. This year, this happened. And so yesterday I started class with, okay, here's what just happened, why this is interesting. And I mentioned, not a lot of people like Charles or used to not like Charles. And so my students asked why. And I said, well, it's because he cheated on his wife Diana quite a bit, and she was like a very prominent public figure. So we move on. We're talking about Greek mythology. And we get to Zeus. Okay. Yeah, you already know this is going. Now, at the same time that we're getting to this, okay, one of the language center faculty has come in to
Hmm.
help one of her students, and she is originally from Iran, but has lived for the last number of years in England. And so, she's in there helping out one of her students. And I mentioned that, I've got just a very brief of each god and goddess. And we go, Zeus, married to Hera, but cheats on her a lot. And this kid blurts out, oh, like Charles. And I was just like, what? Yes. And I look up, and the second language teacher in the back is going, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was great.
Whole thing. Oh,
Well, thank you, Cameron, for taking the time.
thank you. If you want to hear more from us, totally do the commentingy thingy. Did I
For
do that
sure.
right? Did I say it right?
Whatever, dude. I haven't decided. I don't have like a straight thing I do every time. Whatever you want, send us off, man.
To learn more about the British monarchy, you can read an article that was co-authored by me and Cameron called
That's true.
Insert Name of Article here because I can't remember off
I'll
the
put a
top of my
link in the
head.
description, and I'll see if I can do one of the things that comes across in the
Where you
corner.
like point and it happens.
Right
We
there.
wrote about the whole major history of the monarchy from William the Conqueror in 1066. Very good articles by Cameron on the actual conquest itself, and then tracking. And then we wrote a joint article tracking the monarchy to today, which is now out of date
I know. Oh, we
because
gotta
it ended
update
with
it.
Elizabeth, so we're gonna have to update that.
Wow.
And some potential upcoming articles that we've been talking about that we cannot discuss here. But
That's true.
when they come out, we'll let you know on socials.
We definitely will. I do want to say, you are giving me too much credit with that co-author. I added like a couple of paragraphs that were short and I edited it. You wrote like 99% of the thing. So you wrote that one. Own it, man.
Thank you.
And you made this very awesome, I still refer to this graph when I get confused, but this very awesome graph of why the War of the Roses. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fun one.
That's not the F word I thought you were about to say.
Talk about a succession crisis. We're going to talk about the Wars of the Roses. But
man,